Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andres Kazaga. I'm the Director at Large of the Association for the Advancement of Baltic Studies, which is hosting this webinar. I'm a professor of Estonian Studies at the University of Toronto. I'm very glad all of you could be joining us here today. We are recording this session, so anyone who misses it will have an opportunity to catch up later. This is actually the second in our series of webinars with scholars located in Ukraine. The first one was a week ago and the recording is available. So I'm very pleased that we have three excellent Ukrainian scholars with us here today directly, who will be talking about how the war is impacting their work and the work of their colleagues. First of all, we will have each of the colleagues have a brief introduction discussing their own research and their research areas such as society, migration, and memory. And then we'll have a discussion on the ongoing war's effects on Ukrainian academia and the research environment. First of all, we'll start with Sergii Pakhomenko, who is Associate Professor at the Department of Political Science and International Relations at Mariupol State University, where he's also the head of the Center of Baltic and Black Sea Studies. The first question, of course, is where are you currently? As the world knows, Mariupol is being devastated at this moment by the Russian military.
Currently, I am in Lviv. I am in a relative safe place. Fortunately, I and my family managed to escape from Mariupol, which was besieged Russian troops, and residents of Mariupol suffered a lot, and they are going suffer now, unfortunately. I have been living in Mariupol my entire life. I have been working at Mariupol State University. My wife has been a school teacher. My daughter was finishing high school and preparing with her graduation exams. But everything has changed on February 24th. So now I am in a safe place, and I have some time to think about my research. My academic field, my academic interests are politics of memory, especially in Baltic, Black Sea region, nationalism, and nation studies, ethnopolitics. And I decided to continue my research, and my topic is historical memory or manipulation of history as an tool of Russian aggression against Ukraine. Many experts say that historical or rather pseudo-historical rhetoric of Kremlin is simply an ideological cover of its aggression. On the one hand, indeed is true. I think but on the other hand, I think that Putin's rhetoric and Kremlin rhetoric is not only cover, but is one of the goals of so-called special operation. that is to eliminate the Ukrainian state and cover its influence over all Ukraine, his influence over all Ukraine. It's enough to pay attention to the main message of Putin's famous article, which published last summer on the historical unity, Russian and Ukrainians. It's enough to pay attention to his long historical overviews in public statements and at meetings with foreign leaders. And we can see that he pay attention to history, and it is not ideological cover. It's his irrational reality. Kremlin creates its own reality and believes in it. So according to Kremlin views on Ukrainian history, the first, Ukraine never had any historical tradition. I mean, tradition of national building. The second, artificiality of the very idea of the Ukrainian state. Indeed, intended by Poles or by the Austrians in the early 20th. Today, this artificial idea is supported by the West as antipode to Russia. The third message is unfairly defined national border of Ukraine. According to Putin, so-called native Russian territory, which is Donbass, Azov Sea region, Black Sea region, was included in contemporary Ukraine by Lenin and Bolsheviks. The fourth message, unfortunately, Nazism is the main ideology of Ukraine. Is the main ideology of Ukraine. This absurd and unfair message, leads to trivialization of this particular historical phenomenon as Nazism. Finally, the fifth message, Ukrainians are declared to be one people with Russian. However, this doesn't prevent Putin from elimination them. It's interesting to consider these issues, and I believe I will be managed to do it. It's interesting to consider these issues from the perspective of the theory of securitization of the Copenhagen School of Security. Historical memory is rather often now proclaimed as element of national security. I mean, memory law, so-called memory laws, and other decision of authorities which concerned historical memory. This practice exists in democratic countries. It is very widespread in Russia as well. So, in the case of Russian aggression against Ukraine, we can see almost classical scenario of the securitization of memory. It motivates the Russian invasion is in a completely absurd and irrational way. First, a threat to the Russian interpretation of history is announced. I mean, such threats, according to Kremlin, decommunization in Ukraine, an imaginary glorification of Nazism, an imaginary revision of World War II, and others. Second step of securitization, the Kremlin convinced the public by utilizing propaganda. And the third step, unfortunately, afterward follows the elimination of the threat, which is interpreted as the restoration of historical truth and justice. I think that this is the classical scenario of securitization of memory by utilizing propaganda, And finally, I recently watched a propaganda video from Mariupol, from Russian TV, I don't remember channel, about the restoration of schooling on Mariupol. By the way, only one school out of 70 has survived. Only one school. However, people with children were brought for TV picture. There is no gas, electricity, mobile connection, or water in my city, but they are opening school. And they are opening school. And even propagandists couldn't find any arguments to justify this action, except following. They say, finally, children in Mariupol will able to learn truth about great patriotic war. It's a pity. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Sergei. It's truly horrific what's happening in your hometown. Thank you for those introductory remarks. And before we turn to our second speaker, let me remind our audience that the chat is disabled, but you're more than welcome to put your questions into the Q&A. So let us turn now to our second speaker, Kateryna Ivashchenko-Stadnik, who is a senior fellow at the Institute of Sociology at the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, and also a research consultant for the Center of Sustainable Peace and Democratic Development. So I will ask the same question to begin with, that where you are at the moment, and also to reflect on your recent research as it pertains to the current war. And also note here that you're a co-author of a recent book, which is entitled 8 Years After the Revolution of Dignity, What Has Changed in Ukraine During 2013 to 2021. So obviously that's something that we can reference with your work. So Kateryna, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you for having me. And let me start by saying that I'm really grateful for the attention that your center is paying to Ukrainian scholars. As this is my first session with ABS, I just wanted to mention that I'm delighted to join your team. Although as a historian, because I am a historian and social sciences, as a historian in my professional career, I had been a part of consortium which included some scholars from the Baltic states And I think it was something like 10 years ago. And we studied displacement and social identity in the period when Ukrainians, Estonians, Lithuanians, and Latvians have been a part of, I would say, one historical legacy under the control of the Russian Empire and then Soviet Bolsheviks. So that was, we have been through displacements already in the past that we shared together. And now I cannot help mentioning that probably what we all know, that the Baltic states had I would say had a higher awareness of the security issues in the region, and they have, I would put it, high sensitivity about the danger of Russian narratives and Russian propaganda and the way they are used in modern geopolitics. So this comes as no surprise now that the scope of solidarity and military support that Ukraine is currently receiving from the Baltic states is just unprecedented. So I know that Ukrainians appreciate and fully aware of the mass support that the Baltic states is currently showing to my country. Thank you again very much. Well, speaking of where I am, unfortunately my experience just very similar to what I have studied before, because I studied displacement, then I became displaced, because my house was destroyed, one of the first in Kiev, during the third day of attack. It is very famous. I'm pretty sure you have seen the destruction, because the multi-store residential building in the center of Kiev. It was Saturday, something around 8 o'clock in the morning, very quiet morning, and of course many people were inside, and my family and we've been inside. So it was this sense of destruction that I felt at that moment is something I would probably never forget. So I had to leave together with my kids, and we went first to Lviv. So I became an internally displaced person. But as you probably know, Lviv is one of the most popular destinations now for the internally displaced people. And it is saturated with IDPs already, and unable to find any place to live, I moved further to Kharkiv. Kharkiv, again, just to give you an example, Lviv Oblast, before the recent wave of aggression, hosted 11,000 of IDPs. After 2014, 11,000. Now they host 500,000 people. So Lviv and Lviv Oblast just overcrowded, and it's really impossible to accommodate all these people. And Kharkiv now hosts about 200,000 of Ukrainians, which is also a huge, it's a huge deal, it's a huge tension on the social infrastructure. So again, unable to find any place there, I moved further to the mountains. And now I'm in the small mountain village near Zakopane. You probably know Zakopane, close to the Slovakian border. Very nice place, but this is not academic center, I'm afraid. This is rather spa and touristic center. But in any case, I still hope that I will be able to come back to Kiev, because I am based in Kiev and I work in Kiev. And this is a place I just need as a source of energy and source of inspiration. But speaking of my current research, as a part of the team of the Center for Sustainable Peace and Democratic Development, this is a think tank, innovative NGO based in Cyprus, and they started with an innovative tool to study countries and societies that go through conflicts and wars. They developed a tool called SCORE, which is the Index for Social Cohesion and Reconciliation. So they use this SCORE and adopt this instrument in many countries as a very granular optic to trace societal changes and through conflicts. So now what I do with the team of the Center for Sustainable Peace and Democratic Development, we study, I would say, situation on the ground in the Western Oblasts, and specifically relationships between the displaced community and the host community. Because although the welcome reception of the local people in the Western Oblast to the people who left their homes, this is unprecedented again, unprecedented support and enthusiasm and empathy. At the same time, given that the scope of this place is so huge, I should say that, this tension on the local infrastructure is unbearable sometimes. So we study where possible tensions might happen over access to resources, which includes social support, education, job opportunities. And we'll want to develop a tool for needs assessment and probably develop some methodology to deal with mental health and psychological support, both to displaced and to host population, because obviously this is a kind of stress that affects both groups. So this is why in mainstream, I would say, direction of my study and my current work. The second direction is undertaken by a team of the Institute of Sociology in Kiev. And fortunately, most of my colleagues still stay in Kiev, and we conduct meetings, of course, online, but still. The main product, I would say, hallmark product of the Institute is the longitudinal studies called Ukrainian Society. And this is social survey conducted in Ukraine. It's a national survey conducted in Ukraine since the early 90s. So the added value of this survey is that it is one of the few surveys that has this multi-year, longitudinal perspective, and you are able to trace the same indicators for decades. So based on this data, I was lucky to become a part of the research team to work on the book, as you mentioned, 8 years since the Revolution of Dignity. My co-authors are brilliant economist from Kiev, Vladimir Dubrovsky, and also economist and political expert Kalman Mijé, who worked for many years as a senior advisor for the European Commission. And also the project was supported by Mikhailo Vinitsky, who is a sociologist, Canadian-Ukrainian sociologist. And we actually have finished this book like 2 weeks prior to the aggression, something like 2 weeks prior. And we were waiting for a foreword from Yaroslav Hrytsak, famous Ukrainian historian. But unfortunately, then there was a kind of shock for the group of authors, because it took some time to realize where to move on, where to continue the current project, if the book will be still insightful for the audience. But I think it takes such a multi-level perspective of broad systemic, I would say, changes in societal, economic, political area, and it compares data from many years. I think it might be very interesting to show to the audience how Ukraine has developed through independence. Because just to give you a few examples, this is again based on the data that we have. This is the same. This is sample which is stable around 2,000 people have been interviewed annually. So we have found that several tendencies are pretty much stable in Ukraine during the recent years, and these tendencies are the creation and strengthening of the urban creative class. So these are people involved in creative industries, in IT, and this has been not only, social class. This is a class based on values and identity. This is a class active in political life, in social life, with active citizenship worldview. Second tendency that I would like to stress is strong and long-term westernization of institutions in Ukraine, although with some obstacles on the way, with corruption on the way, but still strong Western type developments that most of the institutions crucial for the development of the independent states took place. Then an increase of civil society, and this is something again unprecedented for Ukraine. Civil society has become an actor, a proper actor, both for Maidan and for fighting with aggression now, for acting as a volunteer to support the Ukrainian army. And then the last but not least tendency that was pretty much clear, and it was indicated in the data clearly that this is something which is reinstated through the decades, is the increasing number of people who believe that their main identity is a Ukrainian political identity. So from the hierarchy of identities, starting from the local, I am a citizen of my city, or I am a citizen of USSR, they got to choose what is the main identity for them. So for a majority of people, being a Ukrainian citizen has become a value. So they starting from something like 20% to up to 70% of people before the war in different regions with different successes, of course, less in Donbass, but still, even in Donbass, they define themselves as Ukrainian citizens. And these are, I think, this is a real Ukrainian independent legacy that should be studied and should be promoted. So I pretty much enthusiastic about continuing this work and publishing this book after the war, probably with some acknowledgement and disclaimers, but still I think we have to do this job, and I will be happy to share the link with you when the book is out in the publishing house. Thank you very much. Over to Tymofii, I think.
Okay, thank you very much, Kateryna, for sharing those thoughts and also your personal experience as well. So we have our final panelist, Tymofii Brik from the Kiev School of Economics, where he's an assistant professor in sociology. Tymofii, I'm going to ask you the same question to start with as the other panelists. First of all, where are you physically at the moment, and how has the war impacted your research and teaching?
Hello, I apologize for being late, and I'm very happy to see so many familiar faces, especially Kateryna, who is an old friend and a colleague, and thank you all for arranging this seminar. So I have been in Kiev all these days. So I work at Kiev School of Economics, which is a private but non-profit university. It's very small but active, and we have a very big policy department which works with the government, and so that's why we have been kind of in touch with government, and we received all this information about possible attack. So we took it quite seriously in our university. I'm sure you know that the Ukrainian government and public try to be very careful. So on the one hand, they communicated that there is a risk of war. On the other hand, they did not want to create the panic. So they were quite balanced. But they took it quite seriously. So at our university, we developed sort of security protocols. So we had our own shelter. We had some online communication with students, with colleagues, and unfortunately we had to initiate this protocol. So during the first nights and morning of this invasion, we evacuated our marketing department, IT department, financial staff, academics, scholars and students. They had to initiate what we call individual security protocols, which means, run for your life. But the idea was that everyone had to be prepared. So of course, we were not able to control it, but at least we tried. We talked to people, we asked them to be prepared. So for instance, I had my backpack packed, but some students also were ready, but some students and some staff were not ready. Yeah, there was a huge variation. So we tried to keep, to stay in touch with everyone, all our students, Well, we had some difficult cases. You know, we had students in Gostomel, we had students in Irpin, we had colleagues in Irpin. So it was bad, but you know, they were evacuated eventually. So now our students and our colleagues are scattered. Most of them are in Ukraine in safe locations. Some of them are abroad. We did interrupt our regular activities, but now we are going back to teaching. Undergrad students are attending online courses. Master students are also, you know, attending some classes. Most of the staff, I mean, researchers, we have been working pro bono for, you know, for the government. We created several task forces. We work with different groups on sanctions or on reconstruction, on some public policies and diplomacy efforts. I personally work a lot with projects that are related to public diplomacy. So basically, we brand it, we call it as fighting for Ukrainian sovereignty. It is very important for us to make Ukrainian voices, you know, visible, especially in this day an age when Russian narratives, they basically dominate international debates about what is happening in Ukraine. It's often perceived through the lenses of Russian narratives, so we try to influence that. I personally participated in maybe 30 or 40, I lost count, panels talking about Ukraine. We have organized lectures, what we called Global Minds for Ukraine, inviting world-leading intellectuals to give lectures to Ukrainian audience in English, people like, you know, Paul Krugman. Right now, we have Fiona Hill talking to our audience. We had Anna Applebaum last week. We also created a hardcore econ seminar called Frontiers in Economics. And we also coordinate a project called Ukrainian Global University, which is a very big project to coordinate allocation of Ukrainian students in Western academia. Those students that are refugees, you know, they need some support. We help them to find placement in universities so they can resume their education. But we also fundraise for to support scholars who are in Ukraine. So we fundraised money with the University of Pittsburgh, 40K, George Washington, they will announce it, you know, I think next week. UMass, Massachusetts. So we have some partners who will provide financial support to scholars in Ukraine so they can continue doing their research. And also we are doing weird stuff, you know. I mean, I was just a sociologist with many rejected papers, but now I'm acting wartime vice president of international affairs. You know, I talk to people, I sign memorandums. It's weird, but it's my new life. And other colleagues, I have a co-author who is now fighting in territorial defense. You know, or my boss, the head of the school, Tymofii Brik, he is now delivering medical kits and helmets to the front line. Yeah, so we fundraised about $20 million to purchase and deliver medical kits and bulletproof vests. So this is like a short summary of what we've been doing. We're still doing research, you know, we run in surveys, and I just on Saturday I think I submitted R&R. So the life goes on.
That's good to hear, Tymofii. Thank you for that very informative, insightful introductory remarks there. Now we'll open up for some discussion, and perhaps picking up on one of the themes that you mentioned and Sergei began with. We'll ask Sergei first, because he's been working on historical memory and propaganda. That how has Sergei, how has this massive Russian propaganda impacted on the population? I mean, we hear often of you know, Ukrainians who have tried to message or contact their friends and relatives or colleagues in Russia, and their friends and relatives in Russia have not simply believed what the Ukrainians are telling them that's going on. Have you found anything similar like that with your Russian colleagues?
Thank you. I don't have a lot of academic colleagues from the Russian Federation, and several of my friends from Russia, my colleagues work in Europe, and all of them fully support Ukraine and support me. No, it is not typical position of Russian academic circles. They are so-called Westernization Russia, Westernization Russians. I have a colleague from St. Petersburg. She wrote me at the beginning of war, and she expressed support me, but she is afraid to openly express their views in Russia, because she is in Russia. As for ordinary people, I don't have relatives in Russia, but my wife has, and their relatives called us at the beginning of the war, and they told us, don't afraid, Russia troops are delivering only spot bombing, and it is caused because Donbas people were softened. It's very clear. We can see very clear two narratives of Russian propaganda. The first narratives, so-called spot bombing, and civil population, civil resident don't suffer from it. And the second narrative, the reason of the special operation is saving of Donbas people and Donbas children. And ordinary people, simple people in Russia repeat these propaganda narratives, As for impact of Russian propaganda on Ukraine, before the war, it depended on region. As for our region, Donbas or southern east Ukraine, impact of Russian propaganda was quite huge, even after rejecting Russian TV channel. I think it depends on not only propaganda, and it depends on identity. The thing is that people of Donbass have don't have clear identity. They are so-called bi-ethnos, Russian double identity, Russian or Ukrainian, not clear, and they complement Russia, and they have a lot of relatives in Russia, and they don't believe that Russia can bomb their city. Another situation in the territories which were occupied by Russia. I mean my city Mariupol, I mean countryside, I mean villages near Mariupol. We must understand that people doesn't have any information, any communication, and humanitarian aid provided by occupiers serves as propaganda. Unfortunately, people are disoriented. People want only one: peace. Stop shooting, stop bombing, stop shelling, and all this action providing humanitarian aid by Russian occupies works as propaganda, and people believe them. People believe in their message that Mariupol residents are not welcome in Ukraine, that Mariupol residents are considered traitors and others. I think Russian propaganda now works on occupied territory and works quite efficiently.
Okay, that's not good to hear. Next question will be for Kateryna, and this comes from Tymofii Brik, our AABS vice president, who's in New York State. And it's a question about refugees and human traffickers. It's the majority of the refugees, of course, are women and children who fled to neighboring countries. And there have been reports of human traffickers preying on these unfortunate people. Now, the question is that how much of this knowledge is shared by Ukrainian refugees themselves? Are there government warnings that are being heeded? Is there research being done on this topic? And Kateryna, you're in a very good position to be able to address those questions.
Yes, you know, the situation overview on migration and human trafficking is something that is, I'm afraid, an uneasy task now. Because from one side, of course, we have statistics, we have reports from OCHA or UN agencies, sometimes also for some CSO organizations. But at the same time, this is a kind of picture made of many fragmented parts. What we know by now, but I'm afraid these statistics would be a kind of underestimation of the situation. But in any case, what we know is that during the 2 months of war, it's 5 million people being fled outside Ukraine to the neighboring countries, mostly in Poland, to Poland, and around 8 million are internally displaced. And I would say that internally displaced are also a subject for potential human trafficking. This is not only a problem that refers to the people who fled abroad, but I know that many agencies like Caritas, for example, they trace histories of human trafficking, because this happens, unfortunately, usually on the border, because there was a huge alliance during many weeks after the aggression started. So people were just staying in the lines on the border during night, and it was quite cold. And sometimes I know that people were approached by the strangers who had cars, with an offer to, I can give you a drive. But and many people could have taken this offer. But what the agencies dealing with this problem will have to discover is what happened to these people. Of course, some cases were reported to police, but I think this is a huge amount of work. This is a huge amount of work that should be done. This is just something that should be discovered. I also know that some scientific research project have been launched to collect personal stories, so biographical stories from women who have been displaced on gender-based violence. But this is only started recently, and I'm not in a position to report on the results. But this is actually a problem which always happens anywhere where forced displacement is taking place. But I also wanted to give you a general overview of the situation on the ground with just daily life. Daily life is a troublesome issue now, because probably Tymofii will focus on that issue more than I am able to. But the International Monetary Fund predicted around 35% of decrease in Ukraine's economy this year. And according to the recent survey just done 2 days ago, 39% of people lost their jobs because of the war. And this creates an issue of human trafficking again. If people are just unemployed, probably they will be offered some new places. Probably this is going to be unregistered work, as usually happens during the war. So the economic situation and social situation, which is disturbing, creates situation for increasing tensions and increasing challenges related to forced migration. But in any case, with such a huge scope of displaced population, both in Ukraine and abroad, I think that should be coordinated efforts of the government of Ukraine, of the governments of the neighboring countries, specifically Poland, and I know that such initiatives have taken place, to put more control on the process of border crossing, on the process of on those agencies who deal with refugees and IDPs. And in any case, we still don't know how many people lost their houses, but we have this electronic system. You can submit your application that you have lost your property on the electronic system. So as of 11th of April, it's 76,000 of people reported that they are homeless. In fact, and homeless again should be watched and probably should be allowed some assistance. So this is a problem. That's what I can confirm. And this is a large-scale problem. Is it a large country? It's 40 million people country. And with such a mass-scale migration, which is now not concentrated in the eastern part of Ukraine, this takes all over Ukraine. Of course, this is something that requires coordinated efforts. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Kateryna. Let's now move to our final panelist, Tymofii, and you, Kateryna, you already brought in partly what we wanted to ask from Tymofii about the economic impact of the war. And Tymofii earlier talked about something that, of course, is very interesting for our audience, at how the universities are functioning and how students are getting by, but perhaps first a bigger view on the economic situation, how Ukraine's still functioning.
Yeah, it's of course a huge question. I just want to add to something that what was said before. So quite recently, I think last week, we also conducted a survey among urban population only, because this is an online survey. And we asked people, Ukrainians, if they talk to their Russian relatives or friends, and how do they feel about that, basically. So it was a quite large sample, 1,800 people. Half of them reported that they have some relatives or friends, mostly relatives, people who are older, an aunt or an uncle, maybe a parent. And among those people, 60% reported that they're still talking with their, relatives or friends. Most of them reported that the communication is not going well because their relatives and friends support Russian propaganda. And also they reported that even, after talking to the relatives, nothing changes. So most of these people said that this personal communication does not help to change opinions of people. So it's quite a, it's a devastating situation. You cannot simply break this sort of this bubble even just by by talking, which is a big challenge for scholars in social psychology and communication, because quite a lot of people believe in this contact theory, but apparently it doesn't work so easily. So that's a small comment. But going back to your question about economy, so yeah, we try to collect some data on economic damages. There are a lot of different estimations. Different experts, they say that Ukraine is going to lose from 15 to 40% of GDP, which is much higher than estimations for Russia. For Russia, the estimations are from 10 to 15%. So Ukraine is going to suffer much more. Most importantly, we lost quite a lot of infrastructure, bridges, houses, factories. So our estimation that we're talking only about the infrastructure, we estimated that it's more than 88 billions of dollars of losses. This is a huge sum, and it will be very difficult to recover this situation. So currently, despite all these challenges, I think it's important to stress that Ukraine is functioning. So it's a functioning war economy. So of course there are territories that under shelling or attacks, they are quite dangerous places, but there are places that are safer, and Ukraine has shown some resilience. We see local communities, gromadas, that accept displaced people. We see that parliament is able to vote, that the government is functioning, that national bank is functioning. We don't see this terrible, kind of inflation. Exchange rates are stable. I just received my salary, and so things are working in Ukraine. So we can be resilient here. I anticipate some inequalities, maybe new dimensions of inequalities in the nearest future, mainly urban-rural divide. We see from some other surveys that we also have conducted with our colleagues, we survey business owners and firms, and we ask them about their needs, their shortages. Most of them report that they were able to pay at least 70% of the salary to the employees. So I'm talking about businesses in urban areas. And most of the problems that were reported were about logistics and supplies. So, it's not about, how to say it, it's not about demand. So demand is always there, even during the war. People need to eat, people need to dress, people need to buy something. It's more about how you organize logistics and how you organize your supply chains. And the good news is that these things can be, supported with macroeconomic tools. Yeah, you can give loans, you can give some grants. The government can, have some tax holidays, things like that. And in terms of logistics, the government has this centralized power to, to focus on rebuilding logistics. That's the main goal of the government. Yeah, to build bridges, roads, and things like that. So what I'm trying to say, I guess, to summarize my long and hectic answer, is that there are quite a lot of challenges. Literally, the infrastructure has been destroyed in many places, and there are quite a lot of challenges for economic activities, but there are available devices, tools to fix these problems.
Thank you. The resilience of the Ukrainian state and society is truly amazing. We are coming towards the end of our time, so now we will just have a very quick kind of concluding remarks from all of the participants. So try to limit yourself to 1 minute, and the question will be of how you see the near-term future and what Ukraine's friends and allies can do to help in the immediate term. And of course, we all know that giving weapons to Ukraine so they can win this war is the most urgent thing. But since we're talking to sort of an academic panel here, then perhaps a focus on what the sort of academic community, how Western colleagues can help Ukrainians today, Ukrainian colleagues. So we'll go in the same order. Sergei?
Like all my Ukrainian colleagues, I would like to ask for your questions in following way. Ukraine will win. Ukraine will win. But I think that we need support from our Western allies, military support and diplomatic, political support. They must not forget our problems, and they must help us, because Ukraine is defending not itself. Ukraine is defending all Europe. And I think the minimum allies and international organizations, United Nations as well, have to help to survive people, Mariupol residents who are in Azovstal plant now.
Thank you, Sergei. Kateryna.
Of course, I like the motto that the first step in winning is believing you can win. So in the long run, I'm pretty sure Ukraine will win. We have no other way. We have to. But at the same time, my message would be that my impression is that Russian aggression is getting closer to the West. So what we see this week specifically is that they use the same false historical narratives to deal with Transnistria, and probably Baltic states, I'm afraid to say, might be the next. So what would be my concern for the Ukrainian allies in the academic world is that probably we should better digest the lessons of the first wave of aggression since the annexation of Crimea and occupation of Donbass, because I'm afraid the liberal community, the liberal academic community, did not understand properly these messages. Ukraine should be developed as a topic for new scholarship. So new academic centers should be, not new probably, but the academic center should refocus their studies and deal with Ukraine, not as a part of post-Soviet rhetoric, post-Soviet legacy, not as a part of Soviet or Russian studies, no way. But it is an independent state which has been developing for 30 years. And just to give you one example, back in the 1991, 84% of respondents from Donbass, from Donetsk and Luhansk region, voted for the Ukrainian independence during referendum. 54% of Crimean respondents voted during the referendum for Ukrainian independence. But this is something which was just, broken in the Russian propaganda. And now they use the issue of defending Crimea and defending Donbass from the genocide. So you should better look to the data. You should better study the real data, and we have plenty of data to prove that this is a separate story. This is an independent state. This is society which is different from the Russian society. And this is something the West should be aware of, and certainly develop Ukrainian scholarship, develop Ukrainian studies, which is rather close to the European nations, to Baltic states, rather than to Russia. That would be my suggestion.
I think this is a very familiar theme for us Baltic scholars who have also been trying for 30 years to get out of the post-Soviet category, and the rest of the world has been most interested in researching the situation of the Russian minority, which is being discriminated against, supposedly. So that's a familiar theme. But the
by the way, just the conclusion. Yes, sorry. It's very interesting. You know, 1 year ago there was a survey. Only 0.3% of the respondents reported that they would leave their place of residence because of the language issue in Ukraine. Less than 1%. There's no issue around language. This is something very similar to the Baltic states. This is something that has been played with for years by Russians. Sorry for interrupting you.
No, I'm glad you added that, because that dimension is very important, and particularly what Sergei was saying earlier about the propaganda, that is one avenue that works very well in the West, the question of Russian speakers, which is very much misunderstood. But now the final word to Tymofii.
Well, I concur with everything what Sergei and Kateryna said. I think they put it, very well. I will add something, and I will address what you, Andres, mentioned, that, even here in this academic debate, in this panel, I think we still should talk about weapons and military strategies. I work in academia as a sociologist, but I also work in policy, and I think it's our responsibility as academics sometimes to translate our theories and data in very practical suggestions. And right now, I think this is a united opinion of Ukrainian government, policymakers, citizens, NGOs, and many, many people that we need military support in order for Ukraine to survive and to rebuild itself and to protect Europe as well. So it's not just, I'm not saying it because I'm, a militant myself. I just think this is the best policy which we can do now. And to conclude this, speech, in case you have some moral restrictions or legal restrictions to support Ukraine with military, you can always donate or support us with, helping to save our lives just by buying medical kits or helmets or bulletproof vests. This kind of support, we all need that. Citizens, activists, politicians, people who serve in army. So please donate.
Okay, I hope everyone takes Tymofei's message to heart, and that we scholars can do our part in getting the message out. So now that we've come to the end of our time, I'd like to thank all of our panelists, Tymofii, Kateryna, and Sergei. It's very informative and insightful, and thank you also for sharing your personal stories as well. I'd also like to thank our audience and everyone who has participated today and sent questions, and remind people that this has been recorded. So if your friends want to find out more and weren't able to attend, the recording will be at the Association for Advancement of Baltic Studies website. So once again, thank you to everyone, and we are all hoping and praying for a swift Ukrainian victory. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Goodbye.